Pratein, my friend. This is another total philosophy video to read and understand the so lovable Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason. In this section, Kant turns to one of the biggest questions in all of philosophy. What happens when human reason tries to go beyond anything we can actually experience? We do not stop at asking how the physical world works. We also ask about God, free will, immortality, and the deepest meaning of reality. Kant says these questions matter enormously to us, but that philosophy has often rushed into answering them without first asking a more careful question. Are our minds really equipped to know such things? That is why this section is so important. It is where Kant begins to argue that before metaphysics can become a genuine science, it must first examine the powers and limits of reason itself. In other words, before building grand theories about ultimate reality, we need to ask whether we have the right tools for the job.
Introduction, Part 3. Philosophy stands in need of a science which shall determine the possibility, principles, and extent of human knowledge a priori. Of far more importance than all that has been above said is the consideration that certain of our cognitions rise completely above the sphere of all possible experience, and by means of conceptions to which there exists in the whole extent of experience no corresponding object, seem to extend the range of our judgments beyond its bounds. And just in this transcendental or supersensible sphere, where experience affords us neither instruction nor guidance, lie the investigations of reason, which, on account of their importance, we consider far preferable to, and as having a far more elevated aim than all that the understanding can achieve within the sphere of sensuous phenomena. So high a value do we set upon these investigations that even at the risk of error, we persist in following them out and permit neither doubt nor disregard nor indifference to restrain us from the pursuit. These unavoidable problems of mere pure reason are God, freedom of will, and immortality. The science which, with all its preliminaries, has for its especial object the solution of these problems is named metaphysics. A science which is at the very outset dogmatical. That is, it confidently takes upon itself the execution of this task without any previous investigation of the ability or inability of reason for such an undertaking.
Kant is now saying that the most important problem is not ordinary knowledge about the world we can experience, but the fact that human reason naturally goes beyond experience and starts asking questions about things we cannot directly see, test, or encounter in any possible observation. We think about concepts like God, free will, and immortality, even though there's no ordinary object in experience that we can point to and say, there it is, right in front of us. And yet these questions matter enormously to us, often more than everyday scientific questions, because they concern meaning, morality, responsibility, and the ultimate nature of reality. That is why human beings keep pursuing them even when they are difficult, uncertain, and risky. This is the domain Kant calls metaphysics, the attempt to answer those highest questions of reason. But he immediately adds a criticism. Traditional metaphysics has been dogmatical, which here means not merely stubborn, but intellectually overconfident. It takes up these immense questions and tries to answer them before first examining whether human reason is actually capable of answering them at all. So the paragraph sets up Kant's basic complaint. Metaphysics aims at the highest things, but it has usually begun in the wrong way, by rushing to conclusions instead of first asking whether reason has the right tools for the job.
Now, the safe ground of experience being thus abandoned, it seems nevertheless natural that we should hesitate to erect a building with the cognitions we possess, without knowing whence they come, and on the strength of principles, the origin of which is undiscovered. Instead of thus trying to build without a foundation, it is rather to be expected that we should long ago have put the question, how the understanding can arrive at these a priori cognitions. and what is the extent, validity, and worth which they may possess. We say this is natural enough, meaning by the word natural, that which is consistent with a just and reasonable way of thinking. But if we understand by the term that which usually happens, nothing indeed could be more natural and more comprehensible than that this investigation should be left long unattempted. For one part of our pure knowledge, the science of mathematics has been long firmly established and thus leads us to form flattering expectations with regard to others, though these may be of quite a different nature. Besides, when we get beyond the bounds of experience, we are of course safe from opposition in that quarter. And the charm of widening the range of our knowledge is so great that unless we are brought to a standstill by some evident contradiction, we hurry on undoubtingly in our course. This, however, may be avoided if we are sufficiently cautious in the construction of our fictions, which are not the less fictions on that account.
Kant says that once we leave the solid ground of experience, common sense should tell us to slow down. If we are going to make claims beyond what we can observe, then we should first ask a basic question. Where do these a priori ideas come from, and how far can they legitimately take us? In other words, before building a grand theory, we should check whether the foundation is real. That would be the reasonable thing to do. But Kant then adds that what is reasonable is not always what people actually do. In practice, it was very easy for philosophers to skip this investigation. One reason is that mathematics had already shown that some kinds of a priori knowledge can be real and powerful. So thinkers became overly optimistic and assumed the same success could be extended everywhere. Another reason is that once you move beyond experience, there is no direct observational check pushing back against your ideas. And since human beings love expanding knowledge, they keep going forward confidently unless a contradiction stops them. Kant's warning is that you can become very careful and systematic in building a theory. But if the theory is still built out of unsupported inventions, then it remains a fiction, no matter how neat it looks.
Mathematical science affords us a brilliant example how far, independently of all experience, we may carry our a priori knowledge. It is true that the mathematician occupies himself with objects and cognitions only insofar as they can be represented by means of intuition. But this circumstance is easily overlooked because the said intuition can itself be given a priori, and therefore is hardly to be distinguished from a mere pure conception. Deceived by such a proof of the power of reason, we can perceive no limits to the extension of our knowledge. The light dove cleaving in free flight the thin air, whose resistance it feels, might imagine that her movements would be far more free and rapid in airless space. Just in the same way did Plato, abandoning the world of sense because of the narrow limits it sets to the understanding, venture upon the wings of ideas beyond it into the void space of pure intellect. He did not reflect that he made no real progress by all his efforts, for he met with no resistance which might serve him for a support, as it were, whereon to rest, and on which he might apply his powers in order to let the intellect acquire momentum for its progress.
Kant is saying that mathematics is so successful that it tempts philosophers into overconfidence. Math shows that the mind really can know some things independently of experience, and that is impressive. But Kant says mathematics works under special conditions. It does not just think in empty abstractions. It deals with things that can be constructed or presented in intuition, roughly in a form the mind can actually grasp and work through. Because that support is easy to miss. People see the success of mathematics and start believing that pure reason can go anywhere with no limits at all. That, for Kant, is a mistake. His image of the dove makes the point beautifully. A bird may feel the resistance of the air and imagine it would fly even better in empty space, but in fact, without air, it could not fly at all. Likewise, philosophers such as Plato thought that by leaving the world of the senses behind, they were entering a freer and higher realm of pure thought. Kant says the opposite. Once thought loses all contact with anything that can support and discipline it, it no longer really advances. It may feel elevated, but it is moving in a void. So the lesson of the paragraph is that reason needs some kind of grounding to make genuine progress. Complete detachment from experience does not automatically produce higher knowledge. It can just produce emptiness.
It is indeed the common fate of human reason in speculation to finish the imposing edifice of thought as rapidly as possible, and then for the first time to begin to examine whether the foundation is a solid one or no. Arrived at this point, all sorts of excuses are sought after in order to console us for its want of stability, or rather, indeed, to enable us to dispense altogether with so late and dangerous an investigation. But what frees us during the process of building from all apprehension or suspicion and flatters us into the belief of its solidity is this: a great part, perhaps the greatest part, of the business of our reason consists in the analyzation of the conceptions which we already possess of objects. By this means, we gain a multitude of cognitions, which, although really nothing more than elucidations or explanations of that which, though in a confused manner, was already thought in our conceptions, are, at least in respect of their form, prized as new introspections, whilst, so far as regards their matter or content, we have really made no addition to our conceptions, but only disinvolved them. But as this process does furnish a real priori knowledge which has a sure progress and useful results, reason, deceived by this, slips in, without being itself aware of it, assertions of a quite different kind, in which to given conceptions it adds others, a priori indeed, but entirely foreign to them, without our knowing how it arrives at these, and indeed without such a question ever suggesting itself. I shall therefore at once proceed to examine the difference between these two modes of knowledge.
Kant says that human reason has a bad habit. It builds big, impressive systems of thought first, and only afterwards asks whether the foundation was ever solid. And once that awkward moment arrives, people start inventing excuses rather than honestly checking whether the whole construction can stand. Why does this happen? Because reason really does have one legitimate and successful activity. It can take concepts we already have and analyze them, unpacking what was already contained in them in a confused way. That kind of work is genuine progress. It gives us clearer definitions and more explicit knowledge, even though it does not add new content. It simply makes clearer what was already there. The problem is that reason gets spoiled by this success. Because it is good at clarifying what is already contained in a concept, it starts assuming it can also do something much more ambitious. It begins to add new claims to a concept, claims that are not actually contained in it. And it does this without noticing that it has crossed a line. So Kant is drawing a crucial distinction between two kinds of thinking, one that safely unpacks a concept and another that illegitimately extends it. His point is that metaphysics often confuses these two activities, mistaking bold invention for legitimate knowledge. This is why he says he now needs to explain the difference between them. What we have read in this section is Kant's diagnosis of why metaphysics so often goes wrong. First, he explains that human reason naturally reaches beyond experience toward the great questions of God, freedom, and immortality, and that metaphysics is the discipline that tries to answer them. But instead of first checking whether reason can really know such things, philosophers have often built vast systems too quickly, encouraged by the success of mathematics and seduced by the thrill of expanding knowledge beyond experience. Kant warns that mathematics works under special conditions and that pure thought without proper grounding can become empty, like a bird imagining it would fly better in a vacuum. He then shows how reason deceives itself. It is genuinely good at clarifying what is already contained in its concepts. And because of that real success, it starts thinking it can safely add new claims that were never justified in the first place. So the main lesson of the section is clear. Philosophy needs a critical science of reason, one that tells us what a priori knowledge is, how far it can go, and where it must stop. This is the end of today's video. In the next video, we will read and understand the fourth section of the introduction, of the difference between analytical and synthetical judgments. If you enjoyed the reading we did, consider liking and subscribing to support us to finish the project. Have a nice day. See you soon.